This is the fastest Formula 1 car ever. It reached a top speed of well over 400 kilometers per hour, and it did this while staying within F1's strict regulation. You might have heard about this project before, but this time I got the chance to speak to two of the team who were directly involved, and what they shared with me was incredible. But this wasn't just a record-breaking attempt, it was a wildly ambitious project. In 2006, the team at BAR Honda had a wild idea. Take an F1 car built for the circuits and push it to over 400 kilometers per hour on the salt flats of Bonneville. Definitely not the ideal surface. And to hit those speeds, they had to rethink everything. The aerodynamics were redesigned to cut drag, the engine was pushed to its limit, and they still had to make sure it fit within F1's regulations. And one of the biggest challenges? The huge tyres. At over 400 kilometers per hour, the forces are insane, and on a rough surface like the salt flats, even a small failure could be catastrophic. And cooling the engine was another issue, with the car battling extreme heat as it was flat out for 10 times longer than it was designed for. Then there's the driver. Just imagine sitting in that cockpit, the world blurring around you, feeling the car fight the surface beneath you, doing something that's never been done before. As a driver, that sounds absolutely fantastic. So why did this event even happen?
It was for British American Tobacco, sponsoring British American racing together with Honda, and they like to do special stunts. Then setting a speed record was put out, and Bonneville, because it's the most famous land speed record place, BAT decided, why don't we try and get 400 and we'll brand a new cigarette called the Bonneville 400 cigarette.
That's Willem Toet, the aerodynamics lead on this project. And aerodynamics, of course, was a huge focus. But here's the thing, most of the cars that you see at Bonneville look totally different. They're long, narrow, with skinny tyres that cut drag and offer more grip at those high speeds. F1 cars, on the other hand, have big tyres, a loss of frontal area, and tons of downforce, all of which create drag and lower top speed. They're built for speed through the corners, not for top speeds in a straight line. And that's what made this project so unique. How do you take a car that's designed for something completely different and push it beyond its usual limits? So where do you even start with a challenge like this? Well, the first step is to define the target. What are we actually aiming for?
The original request from British American Tobacco was 400 kph at Bonneville, and we weren't sure if that was possible. We thought we'd probably get 380 kph with a modified Monza car. To go up to 400, we'd have to make some changes.
That's John Dickinson, the vehicle dynamics engineer for the Bonneville 400 project, and the lead figure in making it all happen. Even though F1 regulations were restricted, the 2005 rules allowed more freedom than you might expect.
They wanted it to be not a Formula 1 car modified to be a speed car. They wanted to be Formula 1 regulation legal. So, for example, early ideas we tossed around. Could you put front tyres on the rear as well to make them a bit smaller? A gearing change, which would have been trivial anyway, but could you do it? No, because they would be too small for the regulations.
Once they determined that 400 kilometers per hour was possible, they had to think about safety. The salt flats are a completely different surface compared to an F1 circuit, and they were pushing the BAR Honda to speeds far beyond its design limits. But the real issue? Well, that was grip.
The mu value was about 0.6, we estimated. And if you're looking at Formula 1 tyres on asphalt, it can be up to 1.8. And that has huge implications for traction to get up to speed, for stability at speed. Your stability.
And it wasn't just about low grip. The surface at Bonneville is very inconsistent. Damp patches and craters up to 1 meter wide. Hitting one of those could cause the car to pitch sideways, potentially dig into the salt, and then roll.
I looked at videos of cars at Speed Week, which is the annual event there at Bonneville, and there were some awful crashes where the car would either pitch up or yaw and then roll, and they were quite horrific to watch. And this impressed on me the importance of safety and making sure that the car had good pitch and yaw stability.
And it wasn't just rolling over that was the concern. There was also a risk of the car sliding and then lifting off the ground at those speeds.
I was very concerned about stability, and these concerns in the early days, John and I had a lot of conversations, and that was one of my concerns, that if the car spins, you increase the risk of air getting on any surfaces and causing it to lift.
This was a risky project. So who was going to drive it? Well, it turns out it's a driver you probably know. But before I reveal who, let me take 20 seconds to tell you about an exciting project Willem and I are working on together. Apart from Project Inversion, of course. We're launching an aerodynamics course designed for students and motorsport enthusiasts who want to dive deep into the fundamentals of Formula One aerodynamics. And if you're looking to break into motorsport, this course could give you an edge, helping your CV stand out with practical aero skills that shows initiative and expertise. All taught by one of the best and most enthusiastic educators I've ever met. If that sounds interesting, check out the link in the description. Now, back to the real question. Who was the madman behind the wheel? Well, it's a name you might recognise. South African driver Alan van der Merwe. Today he's best known as a medical car driver for Formula One. But before that, he was a seriously quick racer, competing in F3, F3000 and A1 GP. And in 2005, he even took on the role for test driver for McLaren. And he's still the fastest person to have ever driven an F1 car. Alright, let's get back to the engineering. So, what's the core challenge in hitting 400 kph in an F1 car? Well, the biggest problem is drag.
Just a few simple simulations said you need to get the drag down like big time. So a few really quick checks in CFD told me it's extreme.
And here's what makes drag so difficult to deal with. It doesn't just increase with speed, it actually squares. So if you double your speed, drag doesn't just double, it quadruples. It's a bit like trying to sprint through water. The faster you go, the more it holds you back. And with air, the effect is even more intense. So which parts of the F1 car are causing all of that drag? Well, as you might imagine, most of it comes from the rear wing.
From CFD alone, we really almost had to remove the rear wing completely. You're putting this massive umbrella, this massive air brake behind the car. That creates a reduction in pressure behind the car.
And that's exactly what they did. They took off the entire rear wing. That's why the car looks like it has barely any grip on the rear, especially on the salt. But to meet F1 regulations, they still needed the wing's profile. So they kept just the silhouette with no actual wing and added an extra stabilising fin, which actually helped the car a lot, but more on that later.
When you removed the rear wing, the drag of the car went down a lot lower, a lot more than that, because you don't draw the air through the cooling system quite as much. You get a slight reduction in cooling drag and a reduction in cooling performance.
And the cooling, that's interesting. That's where these really unusual radiator pods come in. Just look at them. The shape is like nothing you'd see on a typical F1 car, but it's all within the rules. And of course, the idea of these pods was to reduce drag.
I did a quick analysis of, okay, what's the drag from the cooling system and where do you see that drag? And you sort of see that drag with an increase in pressure that where the air sees the big hole that the air goes in. So if you can make that smaller, you reduce your drag.
But this car was going to be running flat out for much longer than on a typical F1 circuit, with the engine at really high RPM and so building massive heat. But the radiator ducts are tiny. So how is this really supposed to work? Wouldn't these tiny ducts make the engine overheat?
It looked like there was nowhere near enough area there to cool the engine, but the estimate was that it would work fine at 400 kph.
And that's because at such extreme speeds, the high pressure, high energy airflow forced enough air through the cooling system, letting the team keep those small intake ducts without risking the engine overheating. But the drag problem didn't stop with cooling. The big Formula One tyres create a huge amount of drag, and when going for 400 kph, that's a big issue.
When we arrived at Bonneville, the guys that were locals that were helping us set up when they saw the car roll out and the huge Formula One tyres on it, that there was a bit of muted chuckling, because they knew the significance of having huge tyres and the massive drag that would cause. So they at that point, they didn't think we had a chance.
And when you look at any high-speed vehicle, they typically have very narrow tyres. A thinner tyre has a smaller frontal area and produces less turbulence and drag. And because it's narrower, it also bites into the salt surface better, focusing the car's weight onto a smaller area, which improves traction. So couldn't the team just change to different wheel and tyres? Well, unfortunately not.
Early ideas we tossed around. Could you put front tyres on the rear as well to make them a bit smaller? Could you do it? No, because they would be too small for the regulations.
However, the team did have flexibility with the type of tyre that they used. In the end, intermediate tyres gave the best compromise between grip and drag, and so were used for the record attempt. Next, let's take a look at this weird fin on the back of the car. And what's interesting about that is that it moves automatically. The team was very concerned about yaw stability, basically the car sliding sideways on the salt.
We should put a central fin, because I was very concerned about stability. If the car were to go sideways, even the fin in a straight condition would help to stabilise the car.
But this wasn't a fixed fin, it was active. If the car started sliding, the fin would automatically adjust to help keep it stable. But how did they make it work?
Initially, we were keen on keeping it very simple and having an electric motor to actuate it. That didn't go well.
Remember, this was in a time before DRS, which would be quite a similar system nowadays. It turned out that the load on the hydraulic actuator from the air pushing against it at 400 kph was pushing its limits. So the team came up with a clever solution.
What I suggested to Willem was, with the old fighter aircraft, you used to see that they had part of the control surface forward of the hinge, which reduces the moment that the control surface sees. So we did that, and that helped in terms of reducing the loading and getting the speed up.
So if the car started to slide, the fin would activate, and at 400 kilometers per hour, it didn't need to move that much to make an impact. Now, you might wonder, doesn't this count as an active aerodynamic device, which is banned in Formula One? Well, you'd be right, but the team believed this added safety was essential.
We had it not active, but ready to be active. So if the car had reached a certain yaw angle, it would have activated, and that would have aborted the run. We knew that if we had to activate the fin, that was an illegal run.
So the team removed as much drag as possible. They made the car as safe as a 400 km per hour F1 car running on salt can be. Then the team turned to the gearing. To reach 400 kilometers per hour, they needed a different final drive with much taller gearing.
We had to make changes to the gearing because there was an engine RPM limit of 18,200. One of the other issues was the engine was designed to run at maximum power, maximum RPM for just 15 seconds. We had to run it at that for 45 seconds to get it through the timed mile.
This meant a complete redesign of the drivetrain. Every part from the gears to the differential had to be custom made. But squeezing these new gears into an F1 car, designed with zero extra space or weight, was a major challenge. And then there was the record requirement. They had to make 2 runs, 1 out and 1 back, with the official speed being the average of these 2 runs. And this created another problem: wind. One run would likely have a tailwind and the other a headwind, meaning the drag would change, and normal gears would leave the engine outside its optimal RPM range. So here the team borrowed a technique from IndyCar. When I raced in Indy Lights on the ovals for the first time, one of the most surprising things was the gearing. First through third are actually very long, with big gaps, meaning there's a big rev drop when you change gear. However, fourth to sixth are also very long, but they have much smaller gaps. So the engine can stay in its perfect RPM range across different conditions, such as when you're driving by yourself, when you're in a little bit of traffic, and when you're well in the pack. So the BAR team used this approach for their record attempt.
We needed 2 top gears, one for interwind and one for downwind, and that worked quite effectively.
Now let's get to actually running the car. The team competed 5 tests before the record attempt at Bonneville, Wendover Airport, Mojave Spaceport, RAF Lynham, and finally Southern California Logistics Airport. The first test at Bonneville was just a recce to gather some data on the salt surface. At this stage the car had no modifications, just the lowest drag setup, the Monza spec.
So we went to Bonneville on what we called the recce with a Monza car in its lowest downforce spec. Data collection, looking at the log data to ensure that the stability was what we expected, and to tie that in with the vehicle dynamics analysis that we were doing. Because if you have a crash there, it can be very serious.
With the data in hand, they confirmed the record was feasible. Next, they made the necessary modifications to the car and prepared for a second test at Bonneville. But then, a problem.
We were hoping to go to Bonneville at one point, and it was just a lake, so we didn't do that. But we took the car to the Mojave Spaceport and ran it there. The conditions were terrible because it was a good surface, but it was very windy.
For this test, the team ran the full Bonneville spec car, complete with the rudder, though it was in a locked position as they weren't ready to actively test it. And the test went well.
They just sent the guys, sent the driver up to just do a quick run to just see if just to effectively do a shakedown. Just do a quick run. But of course the gearing is so different to what the driver's used to, not very many points of reference. And he didn't think he was going that fast. He said, it doesn't feel like it's got a lot of power, but I guess it's just the drag at high speed.
Alan, the driver, without realising it, hit a top speed of 414 kilometres per hour and only stopped going any quicker because he ran out of runway. And not realising the speed is an easy thing to do. Without any nearby references, it's actually very hard to tell how quick you're going in a Formula 1 car, which of course doesn't have a speedo. So hitting over 400 kph on asphalt was a great sign. But Bonneville would be a much tougher, more dangerous challenge, and the team still needed to confirm that the rudder would work to catch a spin. So they ran another test at RAF Lynham, this time focused solely on fine-tuning the rudder.
The idea was that we'd have a rudder on the car that was driven as a function of yaw rate error, and we had the option of having it so that the input demand was 0, or we could generate a demand from the driver's handwheel input.
Eventually, the team sorted the rudder and were happy it could catch the car if it got too sideways on the salt. So they headed back out to the States for a final shakedown before attempting the record at Bonneville. The team moved to Southern California Logistics Airport, originally built as a US military installation in the 1940s, and its main runway stretches 4.1 kilometers, 2.5 miles, which is plenty of space to reach top speed.
We went to the Southern California Logistics Airport and did a run there, and that wasn't officially timed, but it was over the 400 kph.
Right, okay.
I think some people wanted to keep that as an official time, but we, for whatever reasons, we didn't have official timing people there. It was very good conditions, it was a good track.
By this point, the team were quietly confident they could break the 400 kph on the salt flats. But they knew the salt surface would make it harder to keep the car straight, it adds more resistance, and ultimately it would be a bigger challenge.
You move a lot of salt, and moving 3 kilos of salt a second is one of the absolute killers that is really reducing how fast you can go on land.
The team arrived at the salt flats, set up camp, and prepped the car to be the first ever F1 car to run at Bonneville.
So we were at Bonneville for 3 days, and we had to build up gradually, checking all the log data, because we didn't want to go hell for leather straight away.
But from the outset, things didn't go as planned.
On the first day, Alan couldn't get the car up to speed, and we'd see him pull away, and the rudder was wagging, and the salt spraying out from the back from the wheel, and I can't remember what speed it was, but you know, he couldn't get much beyond if it was 150, 200 kph, and what was happening is the car wasn't going unstable in yaw, it was just spinning the wheels.
Alan suspected the floor of the car wasn't generating the expected downforce. To manage the rough salt surface, the team had raised the ride height of the car, which in turn reduces the floor's effectiveness. So he suggested lowering it back down again to improve grip.
The surface at Bonneville was quite inconsistent for us. It varies throughout the year, but some bits were solid, some bits were slushy, and some bits were bumpy.
But there were more issues to tackle. Given the rough surface, the team initially ran with traction control. Now, Alan is an experienced driver who knows how to manage wheel spin, but at speeds of 400 kph with constantly shifting surface conditions, traction control seemed like the safest choice. However, it was holding him back.
We were guided by him on this. It's better to turn it off. I know where the slushy bits are, I know where the bumpy bits are, I know what to do with the throttle at those points.
So gradually, the team gave the car more grip, more stability, and reduced the wheel spin, although not entirely. And honestly, from speaking with these guys, driving on this surface sounds terrifying.
Alan found that it was better to let the car wander a little bit in yaw, rather than try and control it tightly, because it had low yaw stability, and quite different to a Formula One car, which has razor-sharp handling.
So it was time for the record attempt. Could the team get to 400 kph across 2 runs? Conditions looked promising with only a 5 kph wind, but a slushy patch sat right in the middle of the track. However, with limited time, the team went ahead with the run.
The downwind leg, and the wind was quite low, about 5 kph, it exceeded 400 kph. But when Alan turned around and came back into wind, it was all looking good until halfway through the timed mile, there was a slushy bit, and I remember looking at the speed trace and seeing it just dip there and then gradually come back up again. And that's what clipped us on achieving the record.
In the end, the team didn't quite hit the record, but they came excruciatingly close.
It was 397.36. We were a bit crestfallen because we'd got so close. We'd dodged all these hurdles, trying to make the car go in a straight line. But actually, in the end, I think we did pretty well because there were so many things that could have gone wrong. Nobody got hurt. Everyone pulled together and made this thing work. So it was an impressive result of teamwork. And we got so close, and it was an amazing project, really. I mean, now when I look back at it, I think I was really lucky to be involved in that and work with all those talented people.
What an incredible project. And technically, they did break 400 kph. Even if not at Bonneville. By the way, thank you to Hannes Schmid for letting us use some of his footage in this video. Hannes was there at this event and shot a documentary, a full 1 hour and 20 minutes. And if you'd like to check that out, it's linked in the description below. Thank you to John and Willem for their time and insight. If you're into wild motorsport projects, check out this video where I interviewed the project lead on Porsche's 919 Evo, a car faster than F1. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.